You ever notice something kind of weird? When the world gets really scary, our watch lists suddenly get filled with monsters. It's this strange pattern. The darker the times, the more we seem to crave stories about things that go bump in the night. So, what's the deal? Why, when we're already stressed out about war, or the economy, or some global crisis, do we actively choose to watch vampires and giant mutants? You'd think we'd want a break, right? Or is there something else going on here?
Well, it's funny because the answer seems to be a total contradiction. On the one hand, yeah, these movies are an escape, a total fantasy. But on the other hand, they're also a way for us to look our fears right in the eye, just, in a safe, fictional way. And that tension is what makes this so fascinating.
To really get this, let's hop in a time machine and go back to Germany right after World War I. We're talking about a country just shattered by the horrors of modern warfare. And you better believe the ghosts of that war didn't just haunt the people, they haunted their movies.
I mean, just look at how tight this timeline is. The war ends in 1918, and bam, just 2 years later, you get these incredibly influential horror films. That is absolutely not a coincidence. This was art as therapy, a way for an entire culture to try and make sense of the nightmare it had just lived through.
And this brings us to a really big idea, one we're going to keep coming back to, the idea of monsters as mirrors. For those German Expressionist filmmakers, the vampire wasn't just some old folk tale. No, he was a reflection of something very specific and very, very recent.
Film historian W. Scott Poole really nails it here. Imagine you're watching Nosferatu in 1922. When that creepy, ghostly vampire rises from his coffin, you're not just seeing a monster, you're seeing an echo of the millions of soldiers who went to war and never came back. The on-screen monster was a way to process the very real ghosts of the war.
Okay, now let's jump forward about a decade to America during the Great Depression. It's a totally different crisis, and what people wanted from their monsters completely changed. It became way less about confronting trauma and way more about finding an escape hatch from a miserable reality.
And get this, the scale is just mind-blowing. 80 million Americans, every single week. That's over half the entire country's population at the time, all piling into movie theaters to forget about their troubles for a little while. And who were they lining up to see? These guys. The classic universal monsters. Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, King Kong. These movies took you to faraway lands, creepy castles in Europe, ancient tombs in Egypt, wild islands that time forgot. And that was the whole point. It was pure fantasy. For the price of a movie ticket, you could swap the grim reality of breadlines and unemployment for a world of thrilling supernatural adventure. The monsters were huge and terrifying, sure, but they weren't your problems.
All right, let's jump forward one more time. Now we're in an age of total war, followed by the chilling reality of the atomic bomb. The fear wasn't about losing your job anymore, it was about the end of the world. And right on cue, the monsters got an upgrade.
You can see this incredible evolution on the timeline. During World War II, a lot of the horror was psychological, the enemy hiding in plain sight. But once the atomic age began, that fear exploded. It became giant, radioactive, and city-stomping.
This really breaks down that shift. In the 40s, the horror was intimate. What if your friendly neighbor is actually a spy? But by the 50s, the fear was massive, almost abstract. What if a monster created by a nuclear bomb destroys everything? The enemy wasn't just next door anymore. It was a threat to all of humanity.
So how on earth did people cope with that level of anxiety? The incredible writer Susan Sontag gave us the key in her famous essay, The Imagination of Disaster. She argued that these sci-fi movies, which might seem silly on the surface, were actually a kind of cultural therapy. They let people process the unimaginable horror of nuclear war in a way they could manage.
Okay, so we've seen the pattern play out through history. Now, let's zoom in on the big theories, the why behind it all. Why do these monster movies work so well on our brains?
First up is Siegfried Kracauer, the guy who studied those early German horror films. He came up with this idea of a collective subconscious. Basically, he said that a country's movies act like its dreams, revealing all the hidden fears and anxieties that are simmering just below the surface of society. Then, of course, we have Susan Sontag's Imagination of Disaster. This explains how those 50s monster movies weren't just popcorn flicks. They were a vital fantasy that helped an entire generation practice and mentally prepare for the very real and very paralyzing fear of the atomic bomb. And finally, the critic Robin Wood put a name to the whole phenomenon: collective nightmares. His theory is so powerful.
He said that the monster in a horror movie is literally the physical form of everything that culture is trying to push down or ignore. All its fears, its taboos, its anxieties, all rolled into one creature.
So if you boil it all down, you get this really simple three-step cycle. First, there's a real fear out there in the world. Second, a movie grabs that fear and gives it a shape. Claws, fangs, whatever. It makes the fear tangible. And third, from the safety of our seats, we watch our heroes fight that monster, and we get to feel a sense of relief when it's defeated. It's called catharsis.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. Why do we watch monsters when the world gets scary? It's because when we're staring at the monster on the screen, we're not really looking at it. We're looking at a reflection of ourselves.
So here's the bottom line. Monsters are mirrors of their time. These films act as a pressure release valve for society. And they pull off that incredible magic trick we talked about at the beginning. They help us escape from reality, while at the same time giving us a safe place to confront it.
It's really that simple and that deep. The ghost of war, the fallout from a bomb, the fear of what we don't understand. The monster on the screen is just showing us the fears we're already carrying around with us every day.
And I want to leave you with this amazing thought from Robin Wood because it just says it all. The horror genre isn't really about being scared. It's about everything our society tries to hide in the shadows. And the monster, well, the monster is that shadow coming back for a little chat.
Which brings us to the big question for right now. Think about the monsters you see everywhere today, in movies, on TV, in video games. What do they look like? What are they? And more importantly, what do they tell you about the nightmares that are haunting us?